So much of this talk is taken from a couple of sermons on Romans 10:17. If you haven't figured out by now, I'm a pretty big fan of that website, and I rely heavily on ideas from that website. So why try to reinvent the wheel? So the talk tonight will focus on a very important role given to the ladies in the salvation of others, and that's the role of spiritual motherhood. I will put enmities between thee and the woman, and thy seed and her seed. She shall crush thy head, and thou shalt lie in wait for her heel. As you probably are familiar, these are the words from the book of Genesis, the prophecy of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So as we see, and we all know every day, as we see every day, the feminist movement has had an overwhelming success rate in destroying the true femininity and the traditional roles of the Catholic woman. Many of us in this room tonight probably have very well been a part of that feminist movement without even realizing it. I can tell you firsthand that my wife and myself, we've been peeling back the layers, so to say, over the years, discovering detail after detail as far as how our own lives were sabotaged by this feminist movement, just by being raised in today's culture. The culture today is so inundated with feminism that anyone raised today, if they aren't raised by very tirelessly vigilant and prudent parents, will inevitably be overwhelmingly exposed to the bombardment of the feminist agenda. And feminism has convinced women and men to reject the God-given role of a woman being a living icon of the church and a living icon of the Blessed Virgin Mary. But what does this look like, to be an icon, a representation of the Blessed Virgin Mary? We'll take a look at the papal encyclical Ineffabilis Deus, written by Pope Pius IX. He wrote it in 1854. This is a quote from that. Just as Christ, the mediator between God and man, assumed human nature, blotted the handwriting of the decree that stood against us, and fastened it triumphantly to the cross, so the most holy Virgin, united with him by a most intimate and indissoluble bond, was with him and through him eternally at enmity with the evil serpent, and most completely triumphed over him, and thus crushed his head with her immaculate foot. So that task that's described of her crushing the serpent's head, it sounds like a pretty gentle task for a woman to accomplish, right? It's a violent idea, this crushing of a serpent's head. But how did she do this? She did this through grace, humility, through her maternity. She performed this through her motherhood. So we'll take a step back and let's take a look at some of the women from the Old Testament. In the book of Judges, you can find Jael. Jael drove a tent stake through the head of the enemy general that was attacking Israel. Also in the book of Judges, we find a woman who drops an upper millstone on the head of an enemy general that's attacking Israel. And in the book of Judith, we can find Judith cutting off the head of the enemy general attacking Israel. So let's first go over, before I dive into this, we can see a prefigurement in each of these stories of the events that were to come. And we'll first go over what a type is before I go any further. You might be familiar with this, but a type is a person, thing, or action that actually existed, but it was meant to prefigure a future person, thing, or action. So in these stories, these three stories of these women in the Old Testament, Israel is a type of the Catholic Church. The attacking generals were a type of the devil, and the woman crushing the heads of the generals were a type of the Blessed Virgin Mary crushing the serpent's head. And these actions are quite violent and gruesome, especially with the idea of a woman taking these actions. But these events are a visualization of the invisible spiritual war at hand. And as members of the church militant, like it or not, we're in the midst of a war. And the planet Earth is under a military occupation by the Catholic Church. So it may sound silly or hard to fathom, but that's exactly the case. And each diocese and parish of the church is physically positioned to conquer spiritual territory and thus save souls. And woman plays a significant role in this war. We might be able to find a more recent personification of this imagery, and it can be seen in the Cristero Rebellion in the early 1900s in Mexico. If you've seen the film For Greater Glory, you're probably familiar with this historical event, this rebellion. But the Mexican government, short history on it, the Mexican government began a persecution against the Catholic Church, in which the citizens themselves took up arms against the government under the banner of Christ as King. And in this resistance, the men, known as the Cristeros, fought Mexican federal troops and were surprisingly successful. But the lesser-known warriors were the members of what was called the Feminine Brigades of St. Joan of Arc. These were well-organized groups of women that smuggled weapons and ammunition to the Cristeros for the cause. They took vows of faith and absolute secrecy, and at their height, the brigades were composed of 56 squadrons totaling 25,000 women. Now, this 25,000 is a significant number when you think about the more famous figures of this revolution against the Catholics, such as Pancho Villa, who had no more than 20,000 men under his power at the height of his power. So, other than what supplies were captured in battle by the Cristeros, they relied solely on the support of these women, this feminine brigade of St. Joan of Arc. So these women working in the background and in secret for men to wage war, a war defending Christ as King, is symbolic of Mary bringing Christ into the world to wage a victorious spiritual war. So as women, you hold an integral role in the battle for souls. If you're a mother, day in and day out, you fight for the souls entrusted to you through humility, grace, and maternity, among other things.